What's good in the YouTube? This is Crazy Samurai 71 here bringing another video. Today I'm bringing a video on Uchuu Sentai Kyuranger episode 36. This episode is called The Sleeping Legend in Lucky's Homeland. And it's a really good episode. The episode starts off with us seeing Lucky having a flashback to his childhood where he remembers his father talking to him when he was really young, and then he has a conversation with Garou about it, but he doesn't really remember his father and he thinks his father's dead. At least that's what he believed. And we also see the whole flashback situation where we ended up seeing Lucky crying after his planet was like burned down supposedly and everything. But then what ends up happening is that the Kyurangers discuss how they remember how Don Armage said, you may defeat me now, but you're not defeating my true body or whatever, and how that there are multiple forms of me, and they deduce the fact that they have to go to the planet, the Southern Crux system, and that's all good and all. But then we end up hearing a distress call from the Leo Minor system, coming from planet Loof, which is Lucky's home planet where he grew up. So Lucky hears a distress call. It turns out to be Caesar, his best friend. Now, it sounds like whatever, why do we even care? But Lucky, of course, it's his home planet or whatever, and he goes there. So then we end up seeing the mouse for the episode, Unjet. Unjet's a very interesting design, and it's an original design, which I'm very happy about, because anytime we get original designs over the ones that we get, which are just basically carbon copies with maybe some small adjustments like we had towards the beginning, weren't that exciting? These are interesting. So what happens is that we end up seeing the monster attacking, and eventually we end up seeing all these people dealing with the Magistrate, and then the Kyurangers appear fighting. And Lucky says his signature phrase like "talk about being lucky" or something like that. That's his typical phrase. And you may think, why am I even mentioning it? But the reason why is because there's this old man that recognizes the phrase. And so after the battle, which actually leads to Caesar, which is his friend that's actually a lion that he was given to him at one point, gets captured by Unjet, which he wants because of him being a legendary machine, which Lucky doesn't register with for some reason, but yeah. So then what happens is that it turns out the guy that recognizes him is his grandfather. Yeah. So eventually what happens is that the Kyurangers return. Well, the Kyurangers go to Lucky's grandfather's place, and we hear about how Lucky's grandfather never told him about his father, kept that a secret, really just wanted him to stay on the planet and everything, and that his real purpose in leaving wasn't originally to explore the edge of the universe like he said in the first episode. It actually was to find his father. So that actually is interesting. Additionally, what ends up happening is that we end up seeing the other Kyurangers back in the base, which I forgot to mention. The Kyurangers that are chosen are Lucky, Hammy, Garou, Spada, Champ, and Stinger. But the thing is that the other Kyurangers have to deal with trying to figure out the Southern Crux, which has a barrier up. So what ends up happening is they have to figure that out. In the meantime, we also hear from we also hear that like balance is going to be involved in getting the situation resolved or whatever. But then at that point, what happens is that the Kyurangers discuss things about like his grandfather, how little he trusted in him, and his ability to protect himself, and he worried that Lucky would die if he were to let him go or whatever. But eventually he does escape, as we know. So then at one point or another, the Kyurangers do end up, vouching for Lucky, mentioning how much he really does care for his father. He really does care for them, and how well he was able to, and how everyone feels that if it weren't for Lucky, they wouldn't be as far as they are now, and he helped them so much. So everyone vouches for him, especially since all of them have been around since like very early on. If Tsurugi were there, it wouldn't be as effective in comparison to those six, which make a lot of sense. I mean, obviously, if all of them were there, it would be a whole other story. But anyway, what happens is that eventually Lucky talks to Garu about his father and everything, and his childhood. We also see some flashbacks of all that. And then at one point, the Kyurangers end up finding out where Unjet is, and specifically Lucky and Garu, and they end up going after Caesar and also fighting Unjet, and then the other Kyurangers are contacted. At that point, what happens is that the Kyurangers all begin to fight Unjet and everything. They do a whole bunch of fights, and at one point or another, what happens is that the Kyurangers do transform, but then eventually what happens is that as the Kyurangers are fighting and everything, there's a moment where Lucky's about to be attacked. Actually, this happens before he transforms, I believe. What happens is that his grandfather tries to tell Lucky something that he had been keeping from him all this time, which is that apparently Lucky had actually Lucky had actually been the son of the king of the Leo system, and that he was set to become the king of the Leo system after his father. And so the thing is that changes the whole perspective of things. Lucky's supposed to be king? What? Really? That's crazy. So then what ends up happening is that obviously that's a big blow to the head, showing a lot, and it also explains why he wanted to keep Lucky safe. So additionally from there, what ends up happening is that the Kyurangers continue to fight, and Lucky tries to prove to his grandfather how much he has grown and how much he's improved as a person. So he ends up using the Shishi Red Orion mode, which allows him to do things that challenge fate and allow him to do things that are beyond the ordinary, as we know. So he's able to use, all the Kyurangers' weapons out of nowhere. He's able to prevent attacks from even touching him. He's able to use his cape to, capture enemies and keep them in the tracks. And eventually, Lucky uses the weapon combination. Then they use the All-Star Crash, and they defeat Unjet. And at that point, we end up seeing we end up seeing Unjet being turned huge. At that point, we end up finally Caesar is freed, and Caesar ends up shooting out a fireball, which turns into a Kyotama. This Kyotama is his own, which is the Kojishi Kyotama, which they just call it the Leo Minor Kyotama in the translation, but yeah, Kojishi. And it turns out that at that point they put it in the size of blaster, and then when they summon the Voyagers and everything, rather than it becoming Kurino, it becomes Super Kurino, which is the combination that involves taking Kurino and taking Shishi Red and attaching Kojishi Voyager or Leo Minor Voyager to Kurino to create Super Kurino, which gives him a lion mane head that's even more intense than it originally was, and a cannon on his arm, which is pretty cool. So all that said and done, the Kyurangers fight using Super Kurino, which is crazy cool, and it's a pretty awesome fight. In the end, what ends up happening is that they do end up defeating Unjet, and then the Kyurangers speak to Lucky's grandfather, who mentions that Lucky's father, King Aslan, still is alive, but unfortunately he submitted to dark matter, and he is persecuting his people on the planet Kylian, which is Lucky's home planet. And so Lucky was happy to know his father's alive, but was unhappy to know that dark matter was taking control and taking advantage of his father. So at that point, Lucky is upset, but he's grateful to know that, he can go to his father now. And I'll tell you this much right now, he does end up going. I already know that because I've seen some of the information that's happening for the future of the show. It's going to be pretty cool. So that's really, really, really neat. As far as things go, the episode continues with everyone being happy to hear all that, and then we end up hearing, but unhappy about the dark matter situation. But then we end up seeing Klugler, which we thought, we thought he was dead, right? Well, it turns out that he is brought back to life. And we also see Tetsu, who we haven't seen in a while, we thought was dead as well. But it turns out that that when Klugler is revived, he asked, where is the professor? And you may think to yourself, what? The professor? Are they talking about Professor Anton? Yes, they are talking about Professor Anton. You may think it's someone else. It actually is Professor Anton. So apparently he is going to Lucky's original home planet, Kylian, which is the planet where his father is. So it's pretty crazy to think that Professor Anton's still alive. How is that possible? We thought he was dead. Not really sure, but really, really interesting. Again, that also means that, apparently the Vice Shogun are revived, even though they were thought to be dead. Now, as far as whether or not Akibamba is alive or not, I would imagine no. Maybe because she probably was actually destroyed. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe she's actually brought back. I actually forget now. I do know I do know a certain villain that we haven't seen in quite some time that we've been wondering where she is going to be brought back very soon. So that'll be interesting. But as a whole, this was a pretty great episode. I'd love to know your opinions. Did you guys enjoy this episode? Were you happy to see this new form for Kurano? Do you think that we'll have any other mecha combinations? Do you think we're going to have some combination involving other things? Do you think that Super Kurano combines with any of the other mechas? Like, can you combine that with Ryoteo? I don't know for a fact. But I'd be curious to see if any of that kind of stuff happens, or if we're done basically with the season as far as new members and new Voyagers, which at this point I would imagine is probably a possibility. I wouldn't say it's a definite, but I would say it's looking more and more so likely at this point. As far as things go otherwise, I'd love to know your guys' opinions about this episode. Did you guys enjoy it? Are you interested in knowing more about Professor Anton now that apparently he's alive, which is something that's a big deal? Also, were you happy to see a new Voyager be introduced in the show? Do you think that there'll be other combinations later, and so on and so forth? So I love to know your opinions. Please remember to like, comment, subscribe, and I hope to see you guys in the next videos. Until then, guys, I'm Crazy Sarah 71, and goodbye, guys.